Now for Raising the Bar, Greater RVA's premier law talk radio show. Call into the show with your stories and questions at 804-454-1366. 804-454-1366.
Good morning. I am attorney Kati Dean with the law firm of Locke & Quinn, and welcome to Raising the Bar, Greater Richmond's Law Talk radio show. The show brings an exciting and varied array of legal topics to listeners throughout Central Virginia and especially in the Greater Richmond area. Wednesday mornings at 9 a.m., the show features true life stories and cases, legal tips, and information from experts and attorneys. The law touches nearly every aspect of daily life, and this show brings both humorous and entertaining stories along with helpful tips, including tips on how to get access to legal services, which is something that not everyone can afford. As a reminder, you can watch a Facebook Live video of today's show by going to the Locke & Quinn page on Facebook. Later on, you can also visit our website, www.lockequinn.com, in order to download videos of all of our episodes. And you can download and subscribe to a podcast of the show by searching for Raising the Bar on iTunes. Today, our topic is what happens when your baby bun needs a different oven. In other words, when you need to use a surrogate to grow your family. We previously spoke with one of our gestational carriers about what it was like for her to carry for 3 different families. And today I'm joined by Jen Nixon, who's been through this process as a mom, or what we in the legal world call an intended parent. Good morning, Jen.
Good morning.
And as a reminder, if you have any questions, you can call into the show at 804-454-1366. So we're going to get started. And first things first, I wanted to go over some of the terminology we might be using during today's interview. First of all, if you hear Jen or I talk about art, we are not talking about the paintings that you hang on your wall. Art is an abbreviation for assisted reproductive technology, and that is anything to do with the process of, basically using a doctor and science to do this whole process. We might use the terms gestational carrier and surrogate interchangeably. Basically, that means someone who is, pregnant with a child that they are carrying for someone else to be the parents of. Technically, there's this distinction between what we call a true surrogate, which is someone who's a genetic parent of the child, and what we call a gestational carrier, which is someone who is not using their own gametes to form the baby. And generally, in most cases, the person is a gestational carrier. We might just use the term surrogate interchangeably, though, and mean gestational carrier. Intended parents are, of course, the people who will be the parents of the child, and oftentimes are the genetic parents of the child as well. ASRM stands for the American Society of Reproductive Medicine, and that is a medical group that sets a lot of guidelines for using gestational carriers and surrogates. And we also might use the term payment. And I just wanted to clarify that in Virginia, under Virginia law, you're allowed to pay reimbursements for reasonable medical and ancillary expenses related to the pregnancy, but any agreement to pay compensation in a contract is void and unenforceable under Virginia law, not necessarily in other states, but in Virginia. So when we talk about payments today, we're talking about these reimbursements for these living expenses throughout the pregnancy, not compensation. Although, as Jen will talk about, sometimes still the reimbursements can be quite high. Mm-hmm. All right. So, Jen, can you give us a little bit of background about how you became involved with this world of assisted reproductive technology?
Sure. So my husband, Brad, and I got married in 2005, and we started trying for a baby in 2007. Now, when we started off, we obviously didn't go down the road of gestational surrogacy. Right. I don't even think that was a thing I even knew about. And when we were in the process of trying and things weren't working out, and we visited our reproductive endocrinologist, we started doing IUIs and did 3 of them. And that is like what I like to call turkey basting, yes. Like the medical turkey basting, if you're wondering what that is. We got pregnant on our 3rd try, and we ended up having a 16-week miscarriage in December 2012. So after that miscarriage, we thought, okay, well, we're just going to do IUI again, mm-hmm. and if we need to, we'll do IVF. So when they were doing what the procedure is called to remove the mm-hmm. pregnancy is a DNC, and when they were doing that procedure, the anesthesiologist noticed that I had an arrhythmia that I had never had before. I didn't think it was that big of a deal, mm-hmm. And so I went with her recommendation to see a cardiologist. Well, that turned into a snowball effect of discovering that I had all these heart issues I completely had no idea about, and were only made worse by the pregnancy. Mm-hmm. So from there, I saw and I still see a really great cardiologist. I went through 3 cardiac ablations to try and fix the problem, and nothing worked. And so my cardiologist recommended you just can't be pregnant. You can't carry a pregnancy to term safely. So that is when the thought of using a gestational carrier came into play. Around this time, I started reading a blog by somebody named Whitney Anderson, who's really involved in the infertility community. And she was getting ready to use a carrier. So I had only found her blog through a miscarriage search on Google. And it just coincidentally, she was getting ready to do this. And I was then starting to see, okay, maybe I have to do this too. So that is when I realized this is probably the better path for us. We lightly considered adoption, but this is what we wanted to do. So, so we started the process and started looking for a carrier, and that's how we got into this world.
Yeah. So when you very first started thinking about it, you said this wasn't something that was even on your radar. So where did you go initially for information on this when you were just trying to figure it out?
It really was through blogs of other people who are going through and coincidentally going through this at the same time. And at that time, and like so many years ago, but this is 2013. So at that time, it just wasn't as big of a thing as I feel like it is now talked about. So it was just really reading people's blogs and following their stories and sort of seeing that process and seeing that it was available, and then visiting like the Resolve page for resources. I did not personally know anybody who had used a carrier. Right. So that was the hard part, is not being able to personally speak with somebody who could give me advice on it.
Yeah. And so I'm also going to do a quick plug here for ASRM, which, as I mentioned before, was the American Society for Reproductive Medicine. They do currently have a lot of information. They usually post every year or a couple of years guidelines for using a gestational carrier, which gives you a lot of really good information about just things you should be thinking about if you're thinking about using a gestational carrier. And that's a good resource for people, I think, who are just, on the internet, because there's, like you said, a lot of information. You just want to make sure that you're getting good information and the right information. Yeah. So can you explain to us how you found your gestational carrier?
Yeah. So at the time that we were going through this, I had been blogging. I'm blogging about our experiences because I was trying to make light of a serious and sad situation, but that's just how I felt like it was the best way to go about it. So as I was blogging about it, everyone's following my story, and we're then announcing, hey, we're going to need a carrier. This is the path we're going to go down. At that time, my husband had worked with somebody in high school at a UCROPS, and his wife happened to have been a carrier for another couple previously, and we had kept in touch, and so they had been following our blog. As she's following the blog, she's realizing she wants to do it again, and then contacted us and offered to be our carrier. So we got really lucky in that sharing the story sort of connected with somebody else, someone who we knew, who we never would have thought to ask anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we hear that from a lot of our clients, that sometimes they'll just have people come out of the woodworks very unexpectedly. So after you and your gestational carrier agreed to move forward, what were the next steps once you kind of matched with this person and she said, I want to do this for you? Where did you go next?
So that conversation felt like an awkward date, because you really are sort of dating in a way. And I remember being really picky about my outfit and nervous about the conversation. So when they offered and we had that big relief, the next day, the plan was for me to reach out to our fertility doctor to schedule a appointment with our carrier. To be able to see if we were able to move forward, because while you find a carrier, there's all these things on a checklist that you have to go down and make sure that they meet.
Yes.
Before it's like, oh, okay, go, here you go. Here's some embryos.
Yeah. And the doctors have a checklist, and the lawyers have a checklist, and everyone has all of the...
It was first step to a long process.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know at some point you came to us.
That's right. We did. I think Charlie was actually my call the next day to set, and she gave me a consult over the phone about what to do. And then we made an appointment.
Yep.
So yes, that's right. We did call you the next day.
Yep. And so when people come to our office on the legal side of things, Jen was talking about checklists, and we do have a checklist that we, give to people that say, before you even jump into contract drafting, here are all the things that you need to make sure are done. Like you need to make sure that your carrier is medically cleared to do this.
Yeah.
We recommend psychological screening on your carrier. We recommend group counseling, and the list has kind of grown longer over the years as we've done more.
It's probably
and more.
Longer than when I did it.
I'm sure. Yeah. As we've kind of learned, what works, what doesn't. In a lot of cases where, especially this is more of an arm's length thing where it's not necessarily a friend that
Right.
we recommend background checks, which are really important because we had one case where that became really important that people had matched through an out-of-state program. They had thought that background checks had been done. Background checks had not been done, and it turned out that there was a warrant out for the carrier, and she ended up in jail for the second half of the pregnancy, and still gave birth, and the intended parents have the baby, but they weren't able to be there for her medical appointments and for delivery. And
a simple background check would have found that.
Absolutely. Yeah, that would have popped up on a background check. We also recommend a home visit because if this is someone that you don't, in your case, it was someone
her,
you knew, but if it's someone you don't know, you can really tell a lot about a person and the environment that your child's kind of be incubating in for 9 months. And that's something you want to know and just sort of get a sense of her in her home, how she is with her other kids.
Right.
And is she calm and, have good family support, or is this a very chaotic environment? So we do have a pretty long checklist that keeps growing.
But it's helpful because then I think from there we knew what we needed to do next.
Yeah. And it gives you a roadmap, I think. So,
and how much money we needed to have available too.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right, you went through your checklist, you talked to your doctors, you talked to your lawyers, you got a contract in place. And then what were some of the things you had to navigate after she became pregnant?
Some things that popped up that we didn't really, you don't think about until you're in the midst of it is who attends ultrasounds?
Right.
Does her husband attend or her spouse attend? Do her children attend? Something as simple as who announces that the beta test came back with a positive, and something like that I didn't even think about, but that was something we had to navigate. In our case, ours was a altruistic surrogacy. So the expectations were a little different than maybe someone who is providing compensation.
Yeah.
So we didn't really map out what that expectation was emotionally, and that probably would have helped us through our experience. And just sort of like, what kind of help do you provide? Are you over there helping babysit their kids? Like how involved are you with the family? And so those are things that we touched on, but didn't really get into until she was then pregnant, and how much support that she needed, as well with her children and just in life.
Yeah. And I can sort of say from the lawyer's, perspective, as we've done more and more of these contracts, this gets negotiated more and more, like really down to the details of, because we've seen, from arrangements, people may have different expectations about what that's going to look like during the pregnancy. And so we'll put in contracts like, intended parents will call at least twice a week, and gestational carrier agrees to, respond to any messages within X amount of time.
And you don't think you need to put that in, but you do.
You do. Yes, absolutely. And we have clients come back to us and say, oh no, this is, my sister-in-law. It's fine. We'll just figure it out. And, we from the legal side are like, yeah, but we're just going to go ahead and figure it out now before anyone's pregnant.
Better to set that ahead of time. So when you're then in it, you can, if there ever is an issue, you can revert back to that agreement that you have.
Absolutely. And I'll also mention that under Virginia law, it does say that the gestational carrier is responsible for the clinical management of the pregnancy. So, under our law, that she does have that, that right and that control. That being said, in the contract, a lot of the times we will, there's a very extensive section in our 60-page contract that we have that says gestational carrier agrees to, not drink wine, not drink, excessive caffeine. And, so she is agreeing to quite a lot in the contract, while still, acknowledging that she's responsible for that clinical management. But that can be a tricky thing to navigate because it's her body, but your baby.
Right.
So
ours is a big runner. And so that was a big discussion on at what point should she start running. And so what we decided was we'll go with the recommendation of her.
Right.
But she wanted to see a midwife. So we went with the recommendation of her midwife. So for some things you have to relinquish control, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it's not the things that maybe your lifestyle is harder to put on somebody else. So that you got to pick your battles.
Yeah. And so you mentioned her using a midwife. Was that something that was...
That is not my... And and no bad things to people who like that. That is not my thing. I am a doctor person. So when we were doing this, I really wanted to use my doctor, but that now knowing that's crazy to think, because this is a person who is going to go through all this medical stuff. And so they need to feel comfortable.
Right.
So she really wanted to use a midwife. She had used a doctor for her past pregnancies, except for her last. She used a midwife and she enjoyed that experience. And so that was something I had to let go of. And I had to be open to a midwife, even though that's not something I would use. That was the experience and the support that she wanted. So
yeah. And that is something that definitely gets navigated.
Yeah, a lot of people want home births or a doula, and then who pays for that?
Right.
That,
Absolutely. And is it covered by her insurance? And if not, is that an expense that's going to come back on the intended parents? So what about things like disclosures? You mentioned early on that you were blogging about this. So you guys, I'm assuming, were pretty open.
Yeah, we were very open. Now, we did agree that we would not use her name until, I believe, 12 weeks, we decided. And at that point, she actually wrote a blog introducing herself and her children and her husband. Okay. So at that point, then she was out.
Yeah.
So we were really open. We even were interviewed by Richmond Times-Dispatch. And so our situation was a little different than most who don't want to be as open. So I guess it's a big important thing that you need to talk about.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we have agreements that really run the gamut, I think, from people who want to be very not open, not Facebook, not, posting about this, and people who are, fine just really sharing it. And I think the important thing is just make sure everyone's on the same page.
Right, because you don't want to share. Well, something that came up was because I was blogging, I had shared right away when we found out that she was pregnant. And that came back later as an issue because I guess that she wasn't ready, because some of her friends read my blog and then found that out.
Yeah.
So you really have to be clear about exactly when you're going to make these announcements, because if you're friends, you have mutual friends.
Right.
So in that case, that came up. So something to think about.
Right. And even with not using her name, I'm sure there's still
they know who know who that person is. So
absolutely. And I mean, families, obviously your, family knew, her whole family knew. Yeah. Because she had done this before.
Yes.
So what's the role of her husband and children in all of this?
I think it depends on the carrier. For our carrier, he really wanted to be involved in sort of the children. And the expectation, I think, of their involvement was maybe a little bit different than what we had thought it would be. And so that sort of created a little bit of problem within the pregnancy. So it's something you really need to be clear about. And that goes back to how involved are the children within your pregnancy, in that who attends these ultrasounds.
Right.
Is it okay that the kids come? We didn't have that discussion, and they brought their kids to our, I think it was a 12-week ultrasound. They brought their daughter to our embryo transfer. And so, you want to do your best to make this work, because it is a relationship that's sort of awkward, because you're even closer than you are with your spouse in a way. And so we didn't want to rock the boat, even though it really bothered us when these things happened, more than maybe we expected when we were being polite and saying, no, it's okay. So I think it's really something you have to think about and nail down and say, how much involvement do you want your children to have? And then you need to really think, are you okay with that? And it's better to be upfront if you aren't, than to be in the midst of it all and be like, no, I'm not okay with that. And then it becomes upsetting for both parties.
Right. Because once she's pregnant, there's no getting out of, this relationship. And it is easier, I think, to have some of these conversations, but it's, you learn from the process.
Yes, you do.
The doctors learn and the lawyers learn. And I will also say that if you have a gestational carrier who is married, her husband under Virginia law does have to be a party to the contract in Virginia. So we've had, some where they're like, oh, does he, he doesn't really, not that involved, but he does have to be a party to the contract. And part of that is because in Virginia, if at least one of the intended parents is a genetic parent of the child, then what happens at the hospital, after the baby's born is you fill out birth certificate amendment paperwork at the hospital, which basically says, this person gave birth to the baby. She's a gestational carrier. She and her husband both sign off we were carrying this child for someone else. We're not the parents. it's fine to issue a birth certificate with our names not on it and with the names of these intended parents on it. And then intended parents, sign as well. And everyone can sign immediately except for the gestational carer who has to wait 3 days after birth, which is, I think, generally a good idea because she's hopped up on the drugs.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah.
You want her to be, fully out of that. So, but everyone can sign those things at the hospital, but the husband of the gestational carer has to be involved, and that's why he has to be a party to the contract, because there are things that you don't realize that he's going to be expected to do as well. And, he has to, kind of agree that he's not going to expose her to anything that's going to cause problems in the pregnancy. He's going to abide by all the, doctor. He's not going to go like to a Zika country and come back. Yeah. So there is a lot that you don't really realize that her family is going to be involved in.
And
this
her
process
family
too.
Is her support too, because you can't be with them all the time. And so you have to make sure that that's secure and that they are okay with the whole situation.
Right. Absolutely. So we've talked a little bit about this already, but you mentioned sort of the level of communication and emotional support during the pregnancy, and that was something you guys sort of had to navigate a little bit. Was that something you kind of like learned as you went, or?
It was. I think that looking back, we really should have been clearer about the types of how often they wanted to talk, how often they wanted to see us, how often they wanted us to be a part of their children's lives, and what that level of commitment was. I think that because we didn't have that really clear conversation, it grew into problems later throughout the pregnancy. So some people that I've met now who have gone through this, their carriers don't want that level of commitment. They don't want to be that involved. They don't want you to text them and call them all the time. So you really have to like measure how much and ask your carrier to be honest.
Right.
Because you don't want to be in the midst of this pregnancy and then all of a sudden you're getting, well, you're not coming over and spending enough time with our children. You're not spending enough time with us. You're not doing this. And you're like, whoa, I didn't know that was expected. So it's really important. It's important to have really hard conversations from the get-go, and it's awkward, totally. But you have to talk about the hard things, because even if it never comes up, you talked about it.
Right. Like you said, it's like dating.
Yeah, it's so like dating.
All right. And I think with a lot of these things, like we said, as we get more into contract drafting, this is something that it's amazing the level of like nitpicky detail that some of our contracts get into, but it is so important. And we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but I think that is also a reason why we really, really push as attorneys, getting that psych clearance and psych counseling. So before we get too much more into this, I think we are getting ready to take a break soon, but just remember that you can call into the show if you have questions. The number is 804-454-1366. That's 804-454-1366. And I'm here. My name is Kati Dean with the law firm of Flock & Quinn, talking with Jen Nixon, who has been through the gestational carrier process as an intended mom and has continued to, I think, stay involved in this world as an advocate for other families, which she's going to talk about a little bit more after the break.
You've been listening to Raising the Bar, Greater Richmond's premier law talk radio show. Call into the show with your stories and questions at 804-454-1366. 804-454-1366.
With SRN News, I'm Rich Thomason in Washington. Wall Street's getting off to a slow start this morning. The key average is opening lower following word that consumer prices rose by 0.3% last month, the most in a year. And retail sales registered their sharpest drop in 11 months in January, falling by 0.3%. Americans cutting back on purchases of cars, furniture, and a variety of other products. A suspect's in custody following a shooting this morning at a security checkpoint outside the National Security Agency campus in Fort Meade, Maryland. 3 people, including a police officer, were wounded. The NSA says the situation is under control and there is no ongoing security or safety threat. And on Wall Street right now, the Dow opening up down about 120 points. More details at srnnews.com.
Amazing to realize, but it's been almost 2 years I've been talking with you about Relief Factor, and I can tell you I've been continually inundated with testimonials. If you're struggling with ongoing back or neck pain, shoulder, hip, or knee pain, or general muscle pain, pains of any kind, do what tens of thousands of others have done so successfully. Go to ReliefFactor.com and order their 3-week quick start for just $19.95. 1-800-500-8384. That's 1-800-500-8384.
Progressive brings you Flowetry with Flow.
Motorcycle and car insurance bundled like macaroni and cheese, please. I got discounts up the wazoo. Yahoo! Saving money, riding down the open road on my bike, dropping fine rhymes, then dropping the mic. Assuming that's okay with the venue.
Bundle your motorcycle and car insurance and save with Progressive. Call 1-800-PROGRESSIVE or visit Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Discounts not available in all states or situations.
Before a trip, you program your destination into the GPS. You need the best directions to get where you want to be.
You will arrive at your retirement in 8
It's the same for retirement. You need a voice to guide you. In Richmond, that voice is Isaac Wright. Join him every Saturday at 3 and Sunday at noon on WNTW 820 The Answer. Isaac's experience can help your retirement journey feel like a drive down easy street. Take the first step by tuning in Saturdays at 3 and Sundays at noon for Retire Right with Isaac Wright.
Arriving at your retirement.
Now, where did this come from, the raid? I was having a nice day. Keep pushing us. Keep pushing us. Keep calling the Tea Party people Nazis. Keep investigating conservatives who love America. Keep it up. You've seen nothing yet. This country defeated Hitler. It can defeat rats like you.
Tune in to the Savage Nation weekdays here on Richmond's Choice for Conservative Talk Radio, WNTW 820 AM and 97.7 FM. The Answer.
Now, back to Raising the Bar. Call into the show with your stories and questions at 804-454-1366. 804-454-1366.
Welcome back. You are listening to Raising the Bar, Richmond's Law Talk radio show. And today we're discussing the world of assisted reproductive technology with Jen Nixon, who had a child via assisted reproductive technology and remains a great advocate for families trying to navigate this process and everything that goes along with it. So we had, before the break, been talking about what this experience was like, finding a carrier, matching, going through that whole process and the pregnancy. So what happens when the baby is born? How did that work for you guys?
So at the time that the last month, we at that point were having some problems between us and our carrier, and so my husband was really involved in making sure that he was attending appointments and all that. So when it came time for the birth, it was a lot of high stress just because we were having these issues. But I will say that it's important to really, and we had done this before, so this wasn't a problem, setting forth who is going to be in the delivery room and making that clear from the get-go and making sure that your carrier is comfortable. In our situation, we were both planning on being in the delivery room, but because we were at this point in our experience, I had opted to be waiting in our room and they bring Zoe to me, our daughter, because I really wanted to meet her on my own. And something that you don't think about is when you're going through pregnancy and this whole experience of even IVF without a carrier, you're doing it with you as a couple, or you and your spouse, your brother, sister, whoever your support system is, and you're not sharing it with outsiders. And so this experience is very much sharing private moments with outsiders. There's someone there who wouldn't normally be there for a gender reveal, you know what I mean? Or just every appointment was letting other people in. And so when it came time for the birth, I just really was certain that I wanted to do this and experience that moment, on my own. So that was something we had then discussed as we got closer. And so she was aware, but my husband was in the room and he cut the umbilical cord and everything. But so you do have to be clear about who's going to be in the room. How is she okay with you seeing?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like what area do you want to be in?
Private moment for her too. So yeah.
And can your spouse or you or whoever cut the umbilical cord? Something that was lightly discussed was if her daughter would be in the room. Are you okay with her having family in the room or whoever her support system will be? And then in C-section circumstances, that changes things a little bit differently. And so who's going to be the person in that instance? When the baby is born, who does the baby go on the carrier's stomach, because some places do delayed cord clamping. Are you okay with that? Does the baby come to you? Are you going to do skin to skin? Are you going to breastfeed? That is something that you can absolutely do. I did it with my daughter. You can induce lactation. And so that's something to think about. Like, do you want to do that? Do you want your carrier to pump for you? Or do you want your carrier to breastfeed? So it's a very high stress situation during the birth. So to really figure that
every single detail.
It's going to make that stressful situation easier because we already have this all planned out.
Right.
So, and you also want to think about after the baby's born, skin to skin is over, where are you staying? Will the hospital let you have your own room? We delivered at St. Francis and they were great. They let us have our own room. They were super accommodating.
Yeah.
And I think now more hospitals I don't know if we were the first, but one of very few surrogacies. By now they probably have had so many that it's an easy thing.
Yeah.
So just sort of having that discussion. And what if the hospital's full? Are you okay with staying in the room with your carrier? So just like things like that to navigate that you don't really think about.
Right. And we do try and pre-plan to the extent that we can with hospitals and sort of let them know, hey, this person is due around this date or due to be induced on this date. This is a, surrogacy situation. These are the intended parents. And so, we do our best on the legal side to sort of prep the hospital for this so that it does go smoothly. But that being said, sometimes you get a social worker who's new and,
not familiar with that situation.
Right. Or you get a hospital that's full or, so you do kind of have to be prepared for unexpected, things to come up. But for the most part, I think a lot of the hospitals around here, like you said, are really
we had a great experience. Yeah.
Really great about it. So that's always nice. And then, like I mentioned earlier, after the baby is born, as long as one of the intended parents is a genetic parent, then we can do the birth certificate amendment paperwork, at the hospital, and the carrier can sign 3 days after the baby's born. And then that way, at the hospital, everything that gets filled out on the report of birth has the gestational carrier's name, but then nobody requests that birth certificate. You wait until the paperwork's filled out, and then the first birth certificate that gets issued has the intended parents' names on the birth certificate. And then there are slightly different legalities just for different situations. Like if, you used a donated embryo, and so neither of the intended parents are the genetic parents, then you're looking at an adoption, which is just a slightly different legal way to secure parentage.
Right.
But and we have, some different recommendations for our same-sex couples as well. We usually recommend an adoption in that case also, but either, at the end of the day, we make sure everyone who's meant to be a parent is a parent, and people who did not intend to be parents are not, they're relieved of their legal obligations. So all in all, from, sort of starting this process through, getting your daughter at the end of it, what was the cost of all of this for you?
So if we're including our IUI cycles before that, I think that we spent probably close to $40,000 to $45,000. Now we did a shared success plan, so that upped our amount a little bit more. Where if someone was going in and just going to do a single cycle of IVF, it probably would have cut it down significantly. For the shared success plan, I think we spent $22,000 on that, and it was great because we had been through miscarriage before, so we sort of wanted to have that peace of mind. So if it would let you I think you get 6 cycles of IVF, and so it was just nice. And yes, we did it on the first try, and I do not regret spending that money at all. It was good for us. For some couples, that's not something that they can do. So because this was an altruistic surrogacy, then we didn't have the issue of compensation, though at the end we did provide some due to like the situation that we were in by that time. So it depends on how much money you have budgeted for to be able to provide compensation, and then having that conversation obviously with your carrier up front of like what their expectation is for, and that's obviously written in your contract too.
Yeah, and some of them do, again, in Virginia, where we use in the contracts is reimbursements.
Yes, reimbursements. That's right. Not comps.
Not compensation. But some carriers, especially if they're not in one of these compassionate, friend or family arrangements, do get a little bit more in terms of their reimbursements for their monthly living expenses. So that is an added expense that can add another maybe 20 to 25,000 over the course of the pregnancy. It's not like a lump sum that they're getting.
Yeah.
But I mean, just over 10 months of her sort of going through all this and being pregnant. And then there are other things sometimes that come up, like maternity clothes, or if she's out of work and needs childcare, housekeeping if she's on bed rest. What if she has to go through a C-section? Is that like an additional amount that she's going to need some living expense reimbursements for? And that's just all amounts that go to your carrier. And like you talked about, the medical can be really, really expensive as well.
And not just the medical of actually making your baby,
right,
but the actual hospital stay. What does her insurance look like?
Absolutely. And that is so crucial that on the front end. And we do at our office, we insist on good, thorough insurance reviews of a gestational carrier's insurance policy to make sure that there's no exclusion for maternity coverage if she's acting as a gestational carrier, which is kind of rare, but we do see them in some insurance policies where it says, here's maternity coverage, except if you're going to be a gestational carrier, that you're not covered because you're having a baby for someone else. So we want to make sure there's nothing like that in there. We want to make sure that the insurance company doesn't consider the intended parent's other insurance,
right.
And so that they're going to try to subrogate there. And we want to make sure everyone's clear on that the baby's going on the intended parent's insurance
as soon as they're born.
Yeah. So we've had, some people say, oh, well, why can't, the carrier just put the baby on her insurance? I'm like, well, because if the insurance company doesn't know that she's not intending to raise the child, then
that changes things.
Yes. And you're getting, I'm sure the insurance company, you never want to lie to your insurance company.
And it's important to have those funds available too in preparation to get, the hospital will bill you so quick after that baby's born, but the bill goes to your carrier. And so in making sure that you have the funds available to then cover that too, because you don't want that to be an issue.
Right. And then, so you've got the medical, you've got legal expenses because you got to pay your lawyers to draft the contract, which in the grand scheme of things, I think is a smaller chunk of change than you're spending elsewhere. And then we talked about if you're doing like site clearance or group therapy, that can be an expense that usually the intended parents pick up.
And then her lawyer representation.
Yeah, so she's going to have separate representation.
Don't skip that.
Do not skip that at all because you want your contract to be good and enforceable, and that's why both parties need to have good, competent, separate representation. But that is a cost the intended parents pick up. And then something that I think a lot of people don't think about is when you're growing your family, and this is often written into our contracts, the intended parents have to have their estate planning documents.
Yeah, we did that. Yeah.
And
it's good to have. Now I'm glad we have it.
Yes. Because if someone else is carrying this child for you and God forbid you're in a car accident or something in the middle of the pregnancy, the carrier needs to know, okay, who's taking this baby that I, was carrying, but have no intention of parenting.
Right.
This can be, but estate planning, again, you're paying lawyers to draft up those documents, and that's an extra expense. So there are a lot of little bits to this that can make it, even in compassionate situations.
And the birth certificate amendment too, paying for that.
Yeah, that's another bit of, legal fees. And sometimes I think people have insurance policies that will cover like a little bit of the medical, but I think that's pretty rare.
Yeah.
We pretty rarely have people that have any kind of insurance coverage for the fertility clinic medical expenses.
That's very,
I mean, usually the maternity is covered through the carrier's insurance, but the fertility expenses are not. So you go through this long, expensive, complicated process, and at the end of it, you get to start another long, expensive, complicated, but great process of being a parent. Yes. So is it something that you and your husband have talked about in terms of how to talk to Zoe about
Yeah.
how she came into the world?
And I will absolutely be honest with her. At 2.5 years old, she is already identifying that if she has objects of different sizes, that the big one is the daddy, the medium is the mommy, and the little one is the baby. I don't know who is teaching her this, but not the big one isn't always the daddy, and that's not, you know what I mean? But then she's also, you're wearing pink for girl. Who, you know, so it's already like, oh my gosh, you're 2.5 years old and I need to correct all these things. And so you know what's going to come next is babies come from mommy's tummies.
Yeah.
And so I have to, and I need to do this soon because you know it's coming if she's already doing this, is to come up with a way to say that's not always the case, you know, and mommy, there's not always a mommy, there's not always a daddy.
Yeah.
And so figuring out a way to navigate that, but absolutely being honest with her about where she came from, because it wouldn't be fair to her to not share that information. And so it's funny that I guess I thought I had until she was maybe 5. So now that she's already doing this, I'm seeing that I need to really come up with a plan to make her see that my tummy's broken. And so someone else lent me their tummy.
Kangaroo mommy.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's maybe finding a book that would be appropriate for that age to explain it.
Yeah.
But, and then one day, even thinking about, will she want to meet her? You know, we have to be open to that too. And thinking about that. So it's definitely, it doesn't end just at the baby being born. There's a whole nother.
There's a person at the end of this.
Yeah. Who has to be able to be okay with the path that you took to be able to have them.
Yeah. And you know, what we have to explain to people sometimes is, you know, your child's not a party to the contract. And so, you know, they might have questions and curiosity and, you know, about this process, and that, you know, I think you guys are being very smart and being very open and you know, open-minded and prepared for all of that. But there are books, I think, for as more and more people start to use this process.
It's becoming people are discovering they need more ways to be able to explain this, especially to such a small child when you don't think that's the age that they would
start asking.
Yeah, but you can't control what other people are teaching them. So yeah, you have to be able to start at home and let them know that there's other ways to come into this world.
Yeah, absolutely. So having been through this entire process yourself, I know you've stayed pretty active in the infertility community in Richmond. What are some suggestions that you have for other families that are sort of starting this process?
I would absolutely recommend doing counseling. We skipped this as a money saver, and because we had kept in touch with them and were friends. So we just avoided this counseling session. I think even now you might require it.
We very, very strongly suggest. Yes.
And I agree with this.
There's and the issue with this kind of world of using a gestational carrier is that there aren't a lot of like legal requirements. There aren't like licensed surrogacy agencies. It's all recommendations and guidelines, and we get them from the American Bar Association has guidelines, the American Academy of Adoption and Assisted Reproductive Technology Attorneys, which is a mouthful, has guidelines, ASRM has guidelines, and so we're kind of, all of these groups are working together to figure out best practices that we're really trying to encourage people to use, but there aren't like hard and fast, you must do X, Y, and Z. So we just kind of have to tell, okay, well, here's what happened in this other situation that we don't want to happen to you, and this is why you should, you know, follow this recommendation.
I wish we had done it. I think that having someone there, and there's counselors now that specialize in surrogacy. And so having someone there to talk individually with them, individually with us, and us together as a group, and broaching those maybe uncomfortable questions that we thought we had discussed, but we didn't, you know, because the whole time you're trying not to ruin this amazing offer that was handed to you. And so you're very delicately trying to keep this relationship afloat. And so you're afraid to maybe say some things that might cause problems. And so having a counselor there to be the mediator,
that's a third party to kind of ask those questions. So you're not,
instead of later down the road, you need them.
Yeah. Well, and then you also have a basis for if problems do arise, you know, later down the road, you can go back to that counselor that, you know, sort of group sessions to maybe try and mediate them that way.
Yeah. So. You don't want it to happen when you haven't had any of that experience before. You don't want it to happen in the middle of a pregnancy when tensions are high and you don't have any of this basis with a counselor already.
Right. So what about for people, you know, you talked about how your match with your carrier was, you know, through a friend and kind of through blogging. For other people that are just starting to explore this, where should they start looking if they don't have a friend or family member that they know is going to do this for them?
So from people that I've met through this experience and being involved in the surrogacy community in Richmond, I've gotten to see a lot of different ways to be able to find a carrier. So one way was I know somebody who ended up emailing everyone she knew and poured her heart out in the story, and her cousin came forward and offered to carry for her. Social media, I mean, if you're a private person, it's going to be hard, but you sort of have to sell yourself. I know I hate saying that, but you do, to be able to make a connection with someone who maybe has thought about carrying, who then needs that little like, oh, but we know each other.
Right.
You know what I mean? Or I know so-and-so that knows you. Blogging.
Yeah.
I mean, for obviously it helped us, but that's a good way. And also it helps keep your friends and family in the loop, because there's a lot, they get really involved in it, and it keeps it, easy to just do one blog and everyone can read it, but you never know who that will reach. And then just, telling your story, just sharing it, no matter to anyone you meet. And you never know. Yeah. You never know who's going to come out of the woodwork and offer. And when that does happen, it's amazing.
Yeah. And I will say that in Virginia, it is not legal for anyone to basically be a surrogacy broker and charge a match fee. So if you are trying to find a surrogate, just be careful that you are not paying someone to match you up with a surrogate. There are websites that you can go to, like Surromoms Online, I think, is one that people use. That, and that's just, I mean, they're kind of similar almost to like adoptive parent profiles, where you're just putting your profile online and
picture of like the carrier, and then also, there's a lot of Facebook matching groups with intended parents and then potential carriers getting together and being able to match that way. And then can they contact?
Yes, they can contact our office. And occasionally, we'll have people, again, we do not charge a match fee because you cannot do that in Virginia. But yeah, sometimes we do have people who have expressed interest in being carriers to us that we keep profiles on. And, if we have clients come in for a consult that are looking for a carrier, sometimes we're able to, people are able to match that way. But yeah, so you don't want to be paying a match fee. And you also want to be careful. There's a lot of, organizations out there that call themselves surrogacy agencies. And, they can be helpful in coordinating things like that. They're out of state. They usually do charge match fees in states where that's legal, which is going to, add to your cost. And also, I don't like the term agency, neither does Colleen, who's been, kind of an expert in this field, been doing it for a long time, because there's really no such thing as a licensed surrogacy agency, because like I said, we don't have licensing regulations. So we call them surrogacy programs, and we just remind everyone who's looking at them that they are programs, not necessarily like adoption agencies, which are licensed and they do have to follow guidelines and everything like that. So since you've been through this experience, you've stayed really involved in this community. What are some of the ways that you've been able to use your experience to help others after going through this yourself? What are some of the organizations you've stayed involved in?
I stayed involved in our local Resolve support group, not as much as I want to now because I have busy with Zoe, but that has been a really big part of my life. I've met amazing friends through it. I actually got my job through meeting somebody through that. And that has been a really big help. When I was starting our surrogacy process, my mom and I co-founded the Race to Parenthood 5K. And so we are the featured event and fundraiser for the Road to Parenthood. We became a nonprofit, and we help spread infertility awareness in the community, along with providing grants to couples who are struggling to pay for their fertility treatments, surrogacy, adoption, past to parenthood. So I try to stay involved. And also we have a Richmond workshop, the fertility workshop, which is very helpful. We did a surrogacy, you were on it, a surrogacy session this past year. It's coming back up, I think, in October or November.
Yeah, I think it's usually around that time.
Yeah, and so that's a really good way to be able to meet others who are maybe going through the same experience as you, and then to be able to meet organizations that can be able to help lead them maybe to the answers they have, answers to the questions they have.
Yeah, and there's a lot of resources there. And I think we're going to try to post on our website a list of just some of the resources for people, especially to get grants or funding, because as we said, this can be a really expensive process, but the Race to Parenthood and Road to Parenthood are great resources for people around here to do that. And then of course the fertility workshop at University of Richmond every year is always always a really good resource, because I think, like you said, when you first started this, you didn't really know anyone else.
No, and now
who had been through it. And there is this community out there now. And so it's, I think, really helpful for families to be able to connect like that. So is there anything in having gone through this entire process that you're really glad you did? Or, I mean, you sort of talked about things you would do differently would be the counseling. Is there anything that worked really well that you would say definitely do this?
Let's see. I don't know if I have any like good, I mean, regardless of the experience between us and our carrier, it really ended, it ended in an amazing gift.
Right.
And so I think that I'm glad that we were open. I'm glad that, that we used her. She had a super healthy, amazing baby for us. And I'm glad that we were blogging and sharing our story, because without doing that, it wouldn't have led me to the road to parenthood.
Right.
That wouldn't have happened. And I'm glad that we were able to be lucky enough to be able to have our daughter and to go through that. So, but I definitely would use Locke and Quinn for assistance and being able to lead people to what they need to do, because you really need that navigation. You can't do this on your own, and don't try and skip on money or paying for things, because in the end it will bite you. So you definitely have to keep with the recommendations that you have.
Yeah. And we do try, again, because this is something that, people first starting out, I think, don't really know where to start. So, on the legal side of things, our role in a lot of cases is kind of quarterbacking this and coordinating it for people, and just sort of giving them that roadmap, because obviously they're getting part of that through their fertility clinic, but that's mostly the medical side of things. And really trying to encourage people. I mean, I know you mentioned earlier the counseling being really important, which we always remind people of. And something else that we talked a little bit about during the break is, we are always trying to make sure that people aren't looking at their contract as just a check mark. And, because people usually, when they get to the point of, all right, they need a contract in place, they're going to do a transfer and use a gestational carrier, they've been going through this process of wanting to grow their family for years. And this has been a really long, difficult, expensive process. And they're sort of starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and they just want to rush through it. And their clinic says, okay, well, you have to have legal clearance. We need a letter from your lawyer saying you have a contract in place and we can do the transfer. And, we get people that are just like, okay, let's get it done. Let's get it done. Let's get it done. And it's so important to talk about what's going to go in your contract. Make sure you understand what's in your contract. Read your contract.
Yes, read it. All 60 pages.
Yes, all 60 pages. And make sure that, you as the intended parents have good, competent representation, that your carrier has good, competent representation. You can talk to your attorneys about what's in there, ask them questions, negotiate things that you're not sure about. That's so important. And, really get down into the nitty gritty. The whole point of the contract is you want to put all of this stuff in there and plan for all of these bad scenarios so that ideally nothing happens.
But in case.
I mean, the more stuff you put in the contract, Colleen and I always say, people must think that we sit around and think up, awful things. But that's the job of lawyers, is to just, make sure that all of this is planned for so that it can be as smooth of a process as possible. All right. So I think we are about at the end of our time. But Jen, thank you so much for joining me today and being so open to talk about your experience. You have been listening to Raising the Bar, Greater Richmond's Law Talk radio show. Please join us next week as Colleen Quinn, I believe, is going to be back with us for the radio show. And remember, you can visit our website, lockquinn.com, in order to download videos of all of our Raising the Bar episodes. And you can subscribe to our podcast on iTunes. Thanks for listening in, and we will see you next week.